Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Ashley Franson-Tingley, the Director of Stakeholder Relations at the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. And I want to thank the Global Business Travel Association, Canada Transportation and Risk Committees, for the invitation to moderate this episode. Today, we're going to talk about the realities of human trafficking in Canada to illuminate this issue for listeners and give you some concrete ways to get on board and help make a difference. Please note that this podcast will discuss the issue of human trafficking in a manner that is meant to be informative but not sensational. This is a heavy subject. Please take care while listening and prioritize self-care as needed. If you are in Canada and in need of support, you can call the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-833-900-1010 24/7 for service in both English and French. So today I'm joined by a dynamic panel of anti-trafficking professionals and allies, including Corporal David Lane, with the Human Trafficking Coordinator with the RCMP in Nova Scotia, Marina Elsener, the Director of Sustainable Development, Diversity and Inclusion for North and Central America with Fairmont Hotels, and Sandy Byback, the founder of Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin today's session, it's essential to take a moment to ensure that our listeners have a good idea of what human trafficking is. Human trafficking is a criminal offense that typically involves using force, fraud, or coercion to exploit individuals and force them into providing a labor or service, including sexual services, for the benefit of someone else. Human trafficking is a severe human rights violation, and it is one of the fastest growing crimes globally, grossing over $150 billion in profits annually. So with that, I am going to turn it over to David. David, you investigate human trafficking cases on behalf of the RCMP. Can you talk to us a little bit about what human trafficking looks like in Canada, and who is most at risk for being targeted by traffickers?
So a lot of my history with the RCMP has been narcotics and gang investigations. And I was always kind of told that human trafficking only affected marginalized, high-risk, vulnerable populations, which it certainly does. It certainly traffickers, exploitators will target on certain areas of our society. But I will say if anybody gets anything from this podcast, it can affect you, it can affect me. A lot of the times, the parents or the family or the friends would say, I didn't think this could affect me. So I'm a big kind of supporter of getting the word out on things such as this podcast and helping people know what the red flags and the indicators are. So human trafficking in Canada, it's actually well written in the criminal code that it doesn't differentiate between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Basically in Canada, any labor of service where someone is exploited could be a form of human trafficking. So our unit is relatively new in Nova Scotia, but we found that it's not just, say, labor trafficking or sex trafficking. People are used to do all sorts of different labors or services on behalf of these traffickers. As you said, when I first started this, I think human trafficking was the third most prevalent crime by organized crime. It's now number 2, only to drug trafficking. And unfortunately, there's indication within our communities, the human trafficking community, that it might surpass the drugs as well. So the risk factors, I would say what we call in our unit is there's a possible crack in the armor of someone who could be trafficked. These traffickers are excellent at identifying somebody's maybe vulnerability or weakness, and they'll hone in on that to recruit them. So it's important to understand that we've had professionals who've been targeted and successfully recruited into human trafficking.
So yeah, and I appreciate you talking about risk factors and really that we all kind of have times in our life where we might be vulnerable, right? And so traffickers are really skilled at identifying those vulnerabilities and then really kind of exploiting them. In terms of how you coordinate law enforcement responses in Nova Scotia, are there specific regions or areas in Canada where human trafficking is more prevalent? And maybe you could speak a little bit to what factors might contribute to that concentration.
So one of the things that we get asked a lot is about statistics for human trafficking, and unfortunately, I say they're very squishy because almost every victim or survivor or person who is being exploited, a lot of the times they don't even realize that they are being trafficked. So it's very hard to rely on stats, which is interesting. But as for our response as law enforcement, by no means do we think this is a police only solution. This is definitely collaboration with other agencies and partnerships. We do have a kind of a new approach, which I think is why you see so many successful prosecutions that probably weren't as prevalent like maybe 5 years ago. And it's one of our unit's mottos is no borders. So we don't operate in silos. We certainly will work with other law enforcements, municipal, provincial, or federal. And the mission is basically within the law enforcement human trafficking community, we don't care what it needs to get the job done. And it doesn't matter where these people travel. We will be there to support the victims and help extract them from the lifestyle. And we will hold these guys accountable who are doing this. So even in the last few years, the amount of success that we've had by working together has been a big jump. And this year we had a session in Lake Louise, Alberta, where all the top investigators for human trafficking got together and compared notes. And even since then, we see an increase in partnerships and cooperation. So that's one of our most successful strategies that we're doing right now, is not let these guys slip through jurisdictions and slip through the cracks. Another thing we do is it's a victim-centered approach. So our goal is not actually charges. It's not actually prosecutions. Our goal is to identify victims, identify how they got recruited, find out what they want to do in their own lives. And our goal is to get them to reach their full potential. So if they just want to be extracted from their lifestyle, but they don't want to go ahead with the prosecution, we still look at that as a success. So we're not measuring it by arrests per se and prosecutions. We're looking at it as helping people exit such a horrible, heinous crime.
Amazing. And I think your comments about the importance of partnership and collaboration are huge. We know that no single entity on its own can end this crime in our country. So it is really important that we're collaborating, we're talking, we're sharing information and best practices. So thank you so much for that, David. Now I'm going to turn it over to Marina. You work with a large international hotel brand. Can you speak a little bit about the different industries or sectors in Canada that might be more susceptible to human trafficking? And also what you think travelers can be vigilant about when they're potentially interacting in those contexts?
Yeah, so human trafficking can occur in almost any industry, but some of the more common industries and sectors it is associated with include sectors such as agriculture, hotels, restaurants, manufacturing, domestic services, and salons. And so when it comes to how travelers can be more vigilant, and it is difficult, as David mentioned, it is considered a hidden crime. But I think, we spend a lot of time when we're traveling waiting around, whether that's sitting in a lobby waiting for colleagues, or standing in a queue waiting to check in, or sitting at an airport waiting to catch our flight. And we'll often distract ourselves by reading a book or using our phone. But I think, all these times waiting around in public spaces gives us an opportunity to actually pay attention to those around us, or even just engage in general conversation with those around us. And I think by doing this, we are given an opportunity to notice something that might seem a little off and may raise some red flags. I really think an interaction provides an opportunity. And I think I'd actually really extend that and say this is not really just when traveling, but in everyone's day-to-day life, whether you're commuting to work or out for dinner or getting your nails done, paying attention to people you interact with and those around you, because trafficking happens every single day. And one of the survivors that we have worked with shared some advice that has always stuck with me. And that was to always lead with compassion, kindness, and empathy. And I think it's easy when someone's acting a little bit off to pass judgment. But she had explained to us that when people are trafficked, they're often dehumanized. And so by just, saying hello and smiling and leading with that compassion, kindness, and empathy can make a difference.
I love that idea of those kind of human moments and human-centered responses, and that certainly echoes what David mentioned earlier in terms of how they are starting to work to conduct their investigations is really a person-centered, human-centered approach. So thank you for that, Marina. In terms of, we know that trafficking is incredibly nuanced and the signs can be layered and overlapping and not necessarily always discernible outwardly. Could you talk a little bit about some of the red flags or warning signs that travelers might want to be aware of as they're going about their day?
Yes, so as you said, it is incredibly nuanced. However, there are common indicators and behaviors. And from a hotel perspective, some of those red flags that travelers may witness include things such as another guest consistently using their do not disturb sign, multiple people moving between rooms or in and out of the same rooms. There may be youth that's inappropriately dressed for their age or the weather. Or if someone does have an interaction, they may find that the adult speaks for the victim when asked questions, and that the young person does not engage and avoids eye contact. But I think it's really important to note that one of these signs on its own does not necessarily indicate a situation of trafficking. And that's why, reporting a suspicious occurrence to someone that is trained and knowledgeable in this topic is really appropriate. And it's really important also to make sure that if there are any suspicious situations, that someone does not try and engage and confront a suspected trafficker or victim. This really could just put yourself and the victim in danger. So rather make note of the facts that have been witnessed and report the incident to someone that is trained and able to investigate the situation appropriately.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. We're not trying to encourage vigilantism. And I think it's important to know that, like you mentioned, the indicators are, a combination and they're overlapping. And it's also often looking at a pattern of repeated behavior, which is really hard to discern if you're just sort of having a momentary encounter with someone. So thank you for identifying that piece. In terms of your own organization's policies, can you talk a little bit about what someone staying in one of your properties, like what actions they might take to report something suspicious related to trafficking while there's a guest with you?
Yeah, so if someone is staying at one of our properties specifically, all of our employees are trained on human trafficking. So the best thing would be to report the suspicious incident and the facts that have been witnessed to a team member. We do have an internal procedure and protocols in place to further investigate a suspected incident, which will be initiated. And this is the case for most large hotel brands at this point in time. However, in the event that you're, at an establishment or a hotel where you're not aware if the team have been trained, then travelers can call the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, which Ashley has provided the number, but in case you didn't get that, it's 1-833-900-1010. And the hotline team will be able to help you navigate any suspected incidents.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think just to point out that the hotline's available to answer questions. And I think it should be, noted that if you are currently experiencing exploitation, you can also reach out to a staff member, right? That they are trained in how to respond. So it's not just if you're noticing something amiss, it's if you're also potentially experiencing a situation. Marina, can you talk a little bit about some of the resources that you know of that are available for travelers who might want to learn more about the issue?
Yeah, so in terms of learning more, there are some amazing organizations that are working day in and day out to address human trafficking. So for anyone that's interested in learning more, I'd recommend referring to PACT, formerly known as ECPAT USA, who has resources for the general public, such as their Parents' Guide to Internet Safety. There's also the Blue campaign that has great awareness videos. And then there's MPAT, or Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking, and we have Sandy on the line today, and they have a really strong resource center. So there's some amazing resources out there. It just takes being curious and looking into it.
Fantastic. Thank you for those resources. And finally, last question for you. Can you talk a little bit about the anti-trafficking initiatives and policies that you've seen Fairmont adopt in recent years, and why you think it's important for the hospitality industry to be a real leader on this issue?
So in terms of some of the actions that we've taken, as I mentioned, we do have a mandatory training for all of our employees to go through. And it really does have three components to it. So first of all, it helps to raise awareness on the issue of human trafficking. Secondly, it trains our employees on these signs and behaviors to look out for. And we do have specific departmental training for this. And then it also ensures that our employees know how to report a suspicious incident and making sure that they feel comfortable in doing so. And then we do also have an additional layer for management and security, which equips them to navigate any suspicious incident. And we do work closely with local police departments and are continuously updating that training to make sure that it is relevant, recognizing that the landscape is continuously changing. In terms of some other actions that we have taken, we have worked with our suppliers and our hotel teams to remove adult content from our TV lineup. And we have also placed guest-facing communication in our hotels to help with raising awareness on the issue. And then just sort of looking from a different angle in terms of our supply chain, we are also working with EcoVadis, which is one of the world's largest providers of sustainability ratings. And one of their core areas of assessment is labor and human rights. And so looking at assessing our supply chain and who we do business with.
Fantastic. That is so encouraging, and it's so encouraging to me to see hospitality leaders really stepping up to take action and be true allies on the issue. Thank you. So this question is for Sandy. She's the founder of Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking. Sandy, can you tell us a little bit about how travelers and community members can contribute anti-trafficking efforts and either while traveling, or are there any initiatives that they can support once they're back home?
I want to thank Marina. That was great to hear everything you said, and I'm really pleased. So thank you. Lots of things we can all do. One of them is called Trafficking, which you can download onto your phones. And what it does when you walk into a hotel room, it's predominantly US and Canada, mostly US from what I understand, is you can take pictures of the room and they'll direct you where to take the pictures, how to take them, and just list the hotel. It's all anonymous, and then it goes into a huge database, and then they can sort of know, and I don't understand all the technology behind it because that's not my thing, They can see if anything's going on in that particular hotel, how many have downloaded things, how many times the police may have been called, and so on and so forth. The one caveat I have about that is be very careful that you are not in any of the pictures, especially when you're taking a shot of the bathroom. And they will tell you all of that. And before you submit it, they say, are you sure you want to submit this photo? That's one thing you can do. The other thing I really believe we all need to do is pick up your cell phone right now and add the Canadian hotline in there. If you're in Canada, 1-833-900-1010. We should all have it off the top of our heads by now. But there also is the global the Global Modern Slavery Directory, where wherever you are in the world, you can find out what the equivalent is of that 800 number. So go ahead of time and be prepared, particularly for those of us, not only who may travel a lot personally, but who do business in many more places than Canada. And I think that's important. I think we can support anti-trafficking charities. One of the things that we suggest at MPAT when we go and speak, if normally it's within the industry. And so we'll say, while you're gathering your people, do something locally that can help victims, whatever that is, whether you're collecting whatever the needs are for the local equivalent of Covenant House or whatever it is, and have them say a few words, because we really believe that this is personal. It's personal, yes, in terms of your business. It's personal, yes, when you actually see work being done and you can then take a picture of, and a lot of the things that are being done is filling knapsacks, and not with the hotel logo on them, because that can really trigger some survivors and victims, filled with calling cards, filled with Tim Hortons cards, filled with whatever is necessary, socks, clothing, because sometimes they literally leave with the clothes on their back. So I think these are a lot of things we can do. Partner with as many people as you possibly can. We know that the Canadian Human Trafficking has a lot of posters that you can use. We just launched something at the recent CMEE show that has the 800 number on one side, and on the other side, it actually has what to look for. And we're hoping that more and more hotels will either put something in their lobbies. I do know that there's a fair number of signage in Accors, but we want more than that. We want these to appear in the hotel rooms. We know it's a huge ask. There's lots of ways we can do this. It is not a government requirement, which means we're not going to get into the 1- and 2-star properties. We're going to get into, we hope, the Accors of the world. And so we're supporting that. And we really think it's important. And it may go unnoticed, it may go noticed. It's about that collaboration, it's about that openness. And and I think that's probably anything else you want me to say about that, Ashley?
No, that was fantastic, and a lot of a really great variety and of practical things that folks can take back and do in their own community. So thank you for that, Sandy. I'm going to turn this back over to Dave. I thought it would be interesting if you could talk a little bit about the role that law enforcement plays in combating trafficking, and maybe if you could speak a little bit to the broader trends that you're seeing as it relates to the hospitality ecosystem. And what I mean by that is, we know that there's air travel, we know that there are rental cars, we also know that abuse of credit may be coming into the picture, hotels certainly, Airbnbs and private homestays. If you could just give us a little bit of a picture of what that looks like for your work.
Yeah, so again, for police, we by no means think that we're the solution and we're not going to wrest our way out of this. I can't stress that enough. So again, we are available to do those investigations, which are very complex, multi-jurisdictional, and they involve a huge amount of police hours to get these done. But we are big believers in working with our industries, hotel associations, our airlines. We want to not only provide awareness, but make an easy way for them to report and or assist us in combating human trafficking. Some of the trends, I will say the benefit of doing this the last couple of years is we have identified two main things about human trafficking. One, the recruiting process that these traffickers and exploiters are using is almost the same across Canada, the States. The way that they are recruiting people, we have their recipe, so we know how they're getting people to do this. And the second one is that the trends are almost consistent across North America for sure. So their Achilles heel is they have to sell their product, which unfortunately is people, but they are moving them. They're staying in our hotels. They're renting our cars. They're flying on our airplanes right next to us. So we kind of have the layout of how they're doing it. Some of the trends, I will say, if anyone's listened to this podcast who's involved in the hospitality ecosystem, I would say a negative or a kind of unfortunate realization we're seeing is that a lot of times the victims are the ones who suffer the consequence. So maybe a hotel manager's not happy with the traffic coming to a room, so they will ban or blacklist or put on some sort of a list where they won't rent to that person anymore, or rent a car. So the awareness is, again, for police and these industries, is that a lot of these people, even though it looks like they're involved in criminality, they're being forced to do it. So that's a message that I want to get out there. So the more training, as the people on the panel said, some of the See Something, Say Something campaigns, reporting to the Canadian hotline, reporting to local police have really made these guys rethink of how they move their victims. We say something in our unit that says, if we shine the light on human trafficking, these guys will have nowhere to hide. So we'll make it difficult for them to basically exploit people right in front of us. The car rentals, Airbnbs, I would say that's relatively new. They're switching from hotels to try to do the private. So that would be a challenge. My challenge out there to people, for the Airbnb owners, to know what to look for. I always ask this when I give presentations: who's the best person to talk to in a hotel when we're doing from a police perspective for investigation? And it's always, everyone always says front desk manager. The cleaner, the people, the housekeeping staff are some of our best witnesses for this, because they will remember the state of that room.
Great, thank you. And I'm glad that you actually flagged cleaning staff, because I think we talk a lot about the impact of commercial sexual exploitation within the hospitality industry. But certainly we're starting to see more of a focus on labor trafficking and labor exploitation within different sectors across Canada, and specifically the hospitality sector as well. So I appreciate you flagging that. So for Sandy, you have an insider's perspective on the intersection of human trafficking and the travel and hospitality sector through your work with meeting professionals. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the recent developments, best practices, or even legislative changes in Canada that are aimed at combating trafficking that travelers or listeners, community members should be aware of?
Yeah, well, the biggest change in Canada is Bill S-211 that came down not that long ago. I actually think that it may have been one of the first that the king signed off on when he became king. And basically, it's a start. It's far, in my estimation, far from perfect, but it basically says it's to fight supply chains, which we've talked a little bit about. And it says they have to have at least $20 million in assets, and they have to be generating about 40 million in revenue, or employ an average of at least 250 employees. And what they have to do under the new rules, and the first one is due May 31st, 2024, is to publish a report each year that discloses the steps they've taken to prevent and reduce the risk that forced labor or child labor is used in their operations and supply chains. This report must be approved by their board, and published prominently on their website. Additionally, a director must attest in writing that the report is true and accurate. And one of the questions I would ask when looking at booking a hotel for a conference or something like that is, what is established within that hotel? I know that the UK already has something like very similar to this. And so if you have a large representation in the UK, as many hotel chains do, you're already reporting on that. So now it's going to become necessary in Canada as well. I don't think it goes far enough, but that's my personal opinion. There's also a law in New Zealand and a similar law in California. The one in the States is in the US is very different. It does relate much more to sex trafficking, and it's been around for a while, but it also changes from state to state. And I'd like to really state something here, that the US has different laws for each individual state, and the best place to get them, and Marina, you alluded to it, is wearepact.org, which used to be ECPAT. And if you go to their professional part of their website, it is really awesome. So we in Canada don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to adjust the wheel so that it works for Canada. And I would say that goes pretty much anywhere. The other thing I think we have to be aware of more and more, because there's more and more laws, there's more and more, as Dave alluded to, that there's more and more recognition, is there are corporation headquarters of hotels in the States that are now being sued. And there's one case going on right now where a couple of young girls were trafficked in a franchised hotel in the States, and they did nothing about it. The hotel did nothing about it. So they're going after the corporate. Obviously, that's going to be in court for a very long time, but it's going to happen. And why let it get to that? Why not put things in place right now that can be helpful, and what are your best practices? And the airlines have lots in place right now. They've been really upfront about a lot of this, and be the leader. Just be the leader.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the civil suits in the U.S. I understand that one of them has been settled. So I think when we're thinking about trafficking and the impacts on a private business or corporation, it's larger than financial. It's larger than a civil judgment. There are reputational risks. There are safety risks as well for your staff. So really important that we are getting more folks on side to do their due diligence around this issue. Any other best practices that anyone wanted to flag on the call today that they think relates to the conversation?
If I could just say something again, as if I put my meeting planner hat on, ask the questions on your RFP when you're looking at booking for a conference, and just simply ask questions. We've got a list of about 7 or 8 questions that we've assembled from a variety of areas. But it opens that conversation at the very, very beginning. And when we first started with MPAT, we would have salespeople saying, "Oh, we don't know anything about that." Now it's become more common and respected, and it just simply opens a conversation. It's not putting blame anywhere. So let's get that conversation opened up across the boards.
Thank you, Sandy. Can you give us a little sample of what some of those questions might be for listeners?
Are you aware of this growing problem as it relates to the use of hotels by criminals for this activity? Do you currently or do you participate in an education and awareness campaign aimed at employees in the hospitality industry? We have 4 pages.
Wow. Fantastic.
What's the campaign that you're doing? Who's being trained? we talked about housekeepers. It's also sales staff need to be trained, to be honest. And does the local CVB have a policy in place? How do I make sure that no one at my client's conference is harmed by human trafficking? So what's in place not to harm my delegates coming into your property?
Yeah, I think it's bigger than just a policy statement, right? It's really what are the actions that each organization is taking to address this each and every day. So thank you for that. So thank you so much to our guests for being with us today and for sharing their expertise. I hope that you learned something new today, but you also are feeling inspired and empowered to be a change maker in your own community and your own workplace. You've been listening to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its work, visit gbta.org and be sure to rate and review this podcast wherever you get them. Until next time, thanks for listening.